Have you ever like had that agonizing frustration of passing a high level language exam, getting a fancy certificate for your wall, and then completely freezing up when you try to tell a simple joke to a native speaker?
Oh, it's an incredibly common experience and so discouraging.
Right. Like you have the vocabulary, you've memorized the grammar rules, but the moment you try to jump into a fast paced debate at a dinner party,
Or decode a sarcastic comment.
yes, your brain just hits a brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, you possess the structural scaffolding of the language, but you completely lack the fluid ability to actually live inside it. You're just constantly translating in your head.
Exactly. I was compared it to taking a closed course driving exam. You can parallel park perfectly between two orange cones in an empty parking lot. That absolutely does not mean you are ready to merge onto the chaotic, high speed highway of a real world conversation.
Oh, totally. With people honking and idioms flying past you.
Right. The rules of the textbook just don't seem to apply. So today we were taking a deep dive into a system designed specifically to get you onto that highway. We're unpacking the English Cycles course, which is it's a one-on-one Zoom-based tutoring system created by an educator named Johan Kassim.
And the specific problem this course is trying to solve is what linguists actually refer to as the intermediate plateau.
The intermediate plateau. It's like that purgatory where you are functional, but you definitely aren't fluent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this isn't for beginners who are trying to figure out how to order a coffee. The materials we are analyzing today focus entirely on a much more stubborn barrier.
Which is our mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack Kassim's unique cycle method and explore how this curriculum actively moves away from traditional dry exam drills.
Like endlessly studying for IELTS or TOEFL.
Thank goodness. Instead, it uses this really fascinating blend of cultural immersion, creative expression, and high stakes grammar to build true native level fluency. But before we get into the mechanics of how it works, we really need to understand the philosophy behind it. And that starts with the architect.
Right, because traditional exams, they're brilliant at measuring raw mechanical skills, but they are terrible at teaching cultural nuance.
Yeah.
So, to understand how to teach that missing nuance, you have to look at Kassim's specific global background. He brings this unique dual heritage to his methodology. His mother is from Glasgow, Scotland, and his father is Sarawak Malay from Malaysian Borneo.
That is such a fascinating linguistic mix to grow up with. I mean, he's navigating a household in Malaysia, but likely speaking impeccable British English, or at least being deeply exposed to it.
It gives him an innate understanding of code switching and cultural context, and he pairs that heritage with over 10 years of international teaching experience.
Across Greece, Singapore, Malaysia, and Australia, right?
Yeah. Kassim has basically spent a decade observing exactly where international students get stuck. The foundational assumption of his course is that you, the student, already have basic to intermediate English.
He isn't going to teach you the alphabet.
Right. His entire curriculum is strictly engineered to bridge that final gap between, I can survive in London and I have advanced native like mastery.
I do want to push back on the delivery method, though, or at least view it from the perspective of a nervous learner. Because learning a language as an adult is, well, it's an incredibly vulnerable process.
Oh, absolutely. You feel foolish.
Yeah. You feel like a child when you mispronounce a basic word. So taking a highly customized class one-on-one on Zoom, staring directly at a tutor for an hour, doesn't that risk being deeply intimidating? Especially for someone just hiding in the back row of a crowded lecture hall.
I mean, you would think so, but the psychology of adult learning actually points in the opposite direction.
Right, really?
Yeah. What Kassim's materials highlight is that the one-on-one environment provides a crucial psychological safety net. Think about that crowded lecture hall. The fear of public embarrassment in front of 30 peers keeps people quiet.
They just stick to the safe, simple sentences they know won't provoke laughter.
Exactly. So the privacy of a Zoom room, where it's literally just you, your Wi-Fi connection, and your bedroom.
It removes the social stakes.
It removes the audience completely. Yeah. And because of Kassim's diverse background, he understands the exact cultural barriers that make international students hesitate. He's creating a private laboratory, a safe space where you can test out complex new ways of thinking, make spectacular grammatical mistakes, and get immediate correction without any public judgment.
That reframes the Zoom dynamic completely. It's not about being put on the spot. It's about having a private sandbox. So let's look at what actually happens inside that sandbox. To solve the problem of robotic textbook sounding speech, Kassim completely ditches linear textbooks.
Right. Instead, the curriculum is divided into thematic cycles, and every single cycle is built on a strict 6-part structure.
No matter what the thing is.
Yeah, no matter the theme, the student must progress through 6 integrated classes. So that's grammar, speaking, listening, reading, writing, and finally a video comprehension question, which the course calls a VCQ.
The themes themselves are incredibly varied, but I want to zero in on Cycle B, which focuses entirely on idioms. I've always thought of idioms as the inside jokes of a given culture.
That is a perfect way to put it, because if you don't know the joke, you are totally left out of the conversation, even if you understand every individual word.
Exactly. And the course explicitly warns against becoming what they call a literal thinker.
Yeah, if you only translate words literally, you become someone that native speakers might inadvertently or even deliberately make fun of. You take everything at face value, which makes you seem robotic or even a bit naive.
Like if someone says, "Whoa, hold your horses," and you literally look around the room for an animal.
The communication breaks down completely.
Yeah. The course highlights examples like hole in one or a bull in a china shop. But here's my challenge. Isn't learning idioms just rote memorization? How does an entire 6-class cycle revolve around phrases like that without just being a stack of flashcards?
Because he integrates those idioms into all 6 foundational skills. The student isn't just reading a dictionary definition. They are required to use the idiom in a writing assignment. They have to deploy it organically during a speaking debate.
So it's all about contextualization.
Exactly. You are learning the emotional weight and the appropriate timing of the phrase.
You're learning the social permission of when you can use it. And that leads to the final test, that video comprehension question. For the idiom cycle, the student is tasked with watching the premiere episode of a classic British sitcom called A Bit of a Do.
Talk about jumping right into the deep end of British humor.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Why a sitcom? But I guess comedy is the ultimate test of cultural fluency because it relies entirely on timing, misdirection, and shared cultural assumptions.
And that's the core mechanism of the VCQ. The goal here is to decode how Yorkshire folks speak in their natural, highly idiomatic way.
Which is not easy.
No, not at all. The student has to listen through a thick regional accent, navigate the cultural context of a British social event, and identify the idioms as they fly by in rapid-fire comedic dialogue. If you can understand why the joke is funny, you aren't just translating anymore.
You are genuinely internalizing the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so having that cultural flair and understanding the inside jokes, that gives you personality. But if the structural foundation of your language is weak, all that cultural decoration doesn't matter.
The house still collapses.
Right. And that brings us to the actual mechanics, the hardest mechanical part of the English language, the verbs.
Yeah. The course notes Kasim's philosophy that verbs account for a massive 50% of the entire English language learning curve.
50%.
Because English has 12 different tenses. It provides incredibly high temporal resolution, but it makes it a nightmare to master.
I usually describe tenses as the time travel mechanics of communication. Without a firm grasp of them, you are trapped in a permanent confusing now.
Right.
You can't vividly describe a childhood memory, and you can't articulate a vision for your future. You're just stuck.
Which is why Kasim dedicates 3 entire cycles to what he calls tense reviews. Cycle C tackles the past tense, Cycle D handles the present tense, and Cycle E takes on the future tense.
But to your earlier point about not doing textbook drills, let's look at how he actually teaches this. Take Cycle C, the past tense. How do you force a student to master the simple, continuous, perfect, simple, and perfect continuous past tenses without just handing them a worksheet?
By tying the grammar directly to narrative, the student reads about historical inventors, and they play a creative storytelling game called Stosu RYMMS.
Oh, I see. If you think about the mechanics of a storytelling game, it naturally forces you to sequence events. You can't just say, the man walked. You have to say, the man had been walking for hours when he finally saw the light.
Right. It demands complex past tenses. And for the video comprehension, they analyze Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot in the film Evil Under the Sun.
Of course. A murder mystery is the ultimate mechanical test for the past tense. The entire plot relies on dissecting what happened before the present moment. Who was where? What had they been doing? Who was speaking to whom?
The grammar serves the narrative. If you don't use the right past perfect tense, the alibi doesn't even make sense.
The necessity of the grammar becomes obvious to the student. Then the curriculum moves to Cycle D, the present tense. And Kasim shifts the focus entirely inward here.
Yeah, because the present tense deals with our current truths. So the writing and speaking tasks are heavily focused on the self. Students write mini autobiographies.
That makes perfect sense. To describe who you are right now, your daily habits, your current state of being, you have to use the present tense. If he's forcing them to look inward and focus on the current moment, I imagine the media pairing has to be something pretty frantic.
It is. The VCQ is a slapstick British sitcom set in a local leisure center called British Empire. It's pure, fast-paced, current moment chaos. The student has to track what is happening right in front of them.
Got it. Then we jump forward in time to cycle E, the future tense.
Yeah.
The realm of what will be, what might be, and what will have been.
Kasim pairs this cycle with reading about artificial intelligence, and the student must craft and deliver a speech titled The Future of My City.
Oh, wow.
But the video comprehension is where the cognitive load gets really intense. The assigned video is a rather unsettling documentary called Life Without Humans.
A documentary about what happens to the earth if human beings suddenly vanish. That is a very dark turn for an English class.
It is, but look at the grammatical utility of that choice. Why pair a dystopian documentary with the future tense? The student is tasked with tracking the hypothetical stages of the Earth's degeneration. To describe what will be happening to steel bridges in 100 years, or what will happen to coastal cities in 1,000 years, the student is absolutely forced to use the future continuous and future perfect simple tenses.
Wow, you can't just point at a screen and say, the building falls down. To accurately summarize the documentary, you have to construct a sentence like, by the year 3000, the building will have collapsed. The dystopian media actively forces the high-level grammar out of you.
Exactly. The student isn't just filling in blanks. They are trying to articulate a complex hypothetical timeline. The grammar becomes a necessary tool to express a profound idea.
So if a learner has successfully mastered the structural time travel mechanics of the tenses, and they've absorbed the cultural flavor of the idioms, what is the ultimate test? Where does this course end?
According to Kasim's structure, the pinnacle of fluency is the ability to apply all those mechanics and cultural nuances to the most abstract, heavy, and complex topics human beings could possibly discuss. This brings us to Cycle G3, which the course materials describe as university level, essentially an Oxford or Harvard tier curriculum.
Now, before we dive into Cycle G3, if you're listening and wondering why a language course is dragging you into ancient religious texts or debates between prominent atheists, it is so crucial to point out that Kasim is using these incredibly heavy topics purely as academic sandboxes.
Yes, very important context.
We are not endorsing any specific theology or taking sides in a religious debate. We are just neutrally reporting on how these dense materials are utilized as a linguistic tool. It's about pushing the student's cognitive load to the absolute limit.
Exactly. The purpose of Cycle G3, which is philosophy and religion, is to test intellectual endurance. The curriculum has the student reading ancient Western philosophy from the Greeks, Islamic philosophy from figures like Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina, alongside African and Chinese philosophies.
That is a staggering amount of dense, historically complex material to process in a second language.
It demands total comprehension. For the listening task, the student analyzes a conversation featuring 4 top atheists pleading for a godless world. And the writing task requires the student to draft an essay on peacemaking in a pluralistic society.
Essentially arguing how entirely different religions and philosophies can logically coexist.
To cap it off, the VCQ is a film called The Message, detailing the story of the birth of Islam.
And what specific mechanical tool, what grammar focus is required to navigate all of this deep, heavy philosophy?
Learning the nuances of the active and the passive voice.
The cognitive load there is just brilliant. You aren't just learning how to mechanically switch a sentence from active to passive on a whiteboard. You are actively using the passive voice to summarize ancient Chinese philosophy.
Think about how essential the passive voice is in academic writing. When summarizing historical events or grand philosophical shifts, the actor isn't always as important as the action. You don't say a group of ancient Greeks established the doctrine.
Right. To sound fluent and objective, you say, the doctrine was established. It elevates the tone from conversational to academic.
And it gives you the linguistic distance needed to debate ethics respectfully.
That is the exact opposite of an exam drill.
Totally. True fluency isn't just possessing a large vocabulary or a flawless accent. Fluency is the ability to synthesize opposing viewpoints like atheism and world religions, process that incredibly complex information, and then articulate those sentiments respectfully, accurately, and objectively.
If you can debate pluralistic philosophy using the correct active and passive voice in real time on Zoom, you haven't just conquered the intermediate plateau. You've left it completely behind.
You were speeding down the highway at that point.
But all this highly customized university tier one-on-one tutoring brings up a very practical reality. This sounds incredibly premium. Kasim's notes show the baseline cost is US $100 per hour. For many international students, depending on local exchange rates, that is a massive financial barrier. How does this course handle the actual business of fluency?
It's a very real hurdle. And to solve it, the course relies on a tiered discount ecosystem designed to make long-term studies sustainable. So the baseline is $100 for that first hour, but it branches out immediately.
Okay, how so?
The first tier is the loyal student program. Once you pay that initial $100, your second class is completely free.
Okay.
And every subsequent class in that cycle is 50% off, bringing the rate down to $50 an hour.
Okay, so the cost drops by half immediately just for committing to stay through the cycle.
Exactly. Then there is the friend recommendation tier. If a student brings a friend into the ecosystem, everyone gets 25% off their classes, and the person who made the recommendation is rewarded with 2 free classes.
It reminds me of a multiplayer video game guild. Like the more you commit to the guild and the more players you bring into your party, the cheaper your overall upgrades become. You're reducing the cost of your own language skills while leveling up your friends.
The game mechanics are actually a great comparison, and the ultimate tier is what Kasim calls joint loyalty. This requires a larger upfront commitment, like a down payment of $300 to $600 for continuous education.
Right.
But it unlocks a massive 75% discount for the recommender, a 50% discount for their friends, plus 3 free classes.
From a business perspective, why offer such steep discounts? Why not just charge a flat, accessible rate of $50 an hour from the very start?
Because language learning inherently requires long-term commitment. The dropout rate in adult language courses is notoriously high because people get frustrated by that intermediate plateau we talked about. By structuring the pricing this way, Kasim financially incentivizes students to stay the course long enough to actually see the breakthrough.
And it builds a word-of-mouth community. Because learning a language is ultimately a social endeavor.
Precisely. By rewarding students for bringing friends, he transforms what starts as a premium, somewhat isolated Zoom service into an accessible communal education platform. It lowers the barrier to entry while structurally ensuring the student builds a support network.
It essentially forces you to build your own English-speaking community. It's highly practical, and it entirely supports the ultimate goal of the course. You can't practice the passive voice in a vacuum. You need people to talk to.
It aligns the business model directly with the educational philosophy.
Well, looking back at all the source material we've unpacked today, it's been quite a journey through this methodology. We started by ditching the rote memorization of IELTS drills and stepping into the safety of a private Zoom room.
Right, and we looked at how mastering idioms, like understanding the humor in a Yorkshire sitcom, ensures you aren't just a literal thinker missing all the cultural inside jokes.
We explored how verbs act as the time travel mechanics of English, forcing students to sequence the past through Agatha Christie murder mysteries, ground themselves in the present, and project the future through dystopian documentaries.
And we saw how that all culminates in the ultimate test of fluency, respectfully debating complex global philosophy using the passive voice.
All supported by a clever, community-driven pricing model that keeps learners engaged. The core takeaway for anyone listening is that true fluency isn't about passing a standardized test. It is about connecting with culture, utilizing creative expression, and having the structural tools to actually communicate your deepest thoughts.
Absolutely.
Which leaves me with a lingering question for you to mull over. If Johann Kasim's standard for true native level fluency requires the ability to effortlessly decode cultural humor in a fast-paced sitcom, respectfully debate abstract philosophy, and tell gripping, emotionally resonant stories with perfect time-traveling verb tenses, is it possible that many of us aren't even fully fluent in our own native languages?